Damon, how did you meet Paul Smoker?
Okay. Paul and I are from the same area. He grew up in the Quad City. Well, we both grew up in Quad Cities. He grew up in Davenport, Iowa, and then I was across the river in Rock Island. Now, we were about 12 years apart, so I had heard of him growing up, but I had never actually met him until much later. So I heard him on some recordings in the Quad Cities, and then that would have been like in 1972. I think he was in Iowa City. He had been in Davenport. I know he played in clubs in Rock Island and Davenport, I guess, when he was in high school. And the waitresses took care of him. That's the story I always got from him. But jumping ahead then, I gone to a junior college in the Quad Cities. Then I went out to San Diego for a year, and I got a chance to play Harry Partridge's music, the instruments out there. And then I came back to DeKalb in northern Illinois, DeKalb, and I went to school there. Then went to New Orleans for a few years, and this would have been 85, 86. I used to do a radio show on NPR stations when I was in DeKalb and also in New Orleans. And I was at I did a jazz show on the station in New Orleans, and the records come in. And I see this record, Paul Smoker Trio, QB, with Anthony Braxton. And I was already a big follower of Braxton for quite a while before that. I go, Paul Smoker. I remember hearing about him. So go in the studio, put the record on, and I was like, wow. I mean, I was just kind of like, I had heard him in the past, but nothing like, approaching with this. It was with Phil Haynes and Ron Mahovic. So I was really impressed with that, and I kind of filed it away. And then I moved back to Chicago not long after that. And I had recorded my first record partially in New Orleans and partially in DeKalb. And so I tracked down Paul's address. I knew he was at Co, which I'd never been to, but I knew where it was. That was up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And so I sent him the record, with a note saying we knew some of the same people back in Quad Cities. And then a few weeks after that, the trio was playing a concert and a concert series in Chicago. So I went there to the concert and then went backstage afterwards, and we met. And, he was real open to talking and just, real, and like I say, we knew some of the same people. So we kind of hit it off pretty well already. And as it happened that night too, Jim Yonda was playing guitar, had been a student of Paul's back at Co along with Phil. And I actually met him that night, Jim. And then for a few weeks after that, Jim and I got together. Then a few weeks after that, I got in touch with Paul back in Iowa to see if he'd want to come up and play a couple of gigs for whatever money was available. But he was all for it and came up and read down my music and some other more obscure tunes, and had a great time. And then that kind of started that was the start really of a friendship. And I learned a lot from him for not actually being a student of his. So that was 88. And then a couple of years later, we did my second album, which is a CD, and called All the Above. And Paul was on that, along with Yonda was on it, and a couple of really good Chicago musicians. Ryan Schultz, bass trumpet, and Larry Cohet, bass player. And then Paul C.A. was in Iowa at the time, tenor saxophonist, flutist. Right after the date, this would have been July of '90, both Pauls took off. Paul moved to Rochester. Beverly got the gig out there, and Paul CA moved to West Virginia, and he was out there for quite a few years. He and his wife both taught out there, and then so we did that first album, and then even though Paul had moved to New York, we had stayed in touch, and when he would come back, we'd get together, and we did some more playing off and on through the years. Not as often as I'd like, but it was we regularly stayed in touch, and we were able to do another CD with me as a leader, and then another one with we both were kind of like co-leaders on the date. Ken Filiano was on that, along with Ryan Schultz, and then another saxophonist from Chicago who I've played with for years and years, Chuck Rodelick, who's a really great saxophonist. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to do a couple of the CDs, particularly the first CD. That's when I met Paul CA through him. So, and then Paul and I did a few other things, but I stayed in touch, and our families were friends, and still are, hopefully. And yeah, I mean, he was like I said, it was sort of close to being a mentor for me, as far as showing me some things that I wasn't aware of or wasn't that clear on. He was an inspiration. In fact, the long piece, I think, that's on All of the Above CD of mine is like a long suite that was sort of based on 12-tone music forward. Although if it sounds like it's not supposed to sound that way, but that's the way it's built. But I think it was after talking with Paul about things like that, I think that was really the inspiration for Peace. And there was a long, semi-written, mostly improvised passage for trumpet that I can't imagine anyone else ever playing it besides him. I mean, it's difficult for one thing, but it's got a certain style that I like to think fit Paul's personality. So I've always been really happy with that.
I wanted to circle back to that first moment. I've gotten a handful of great first impression stories in doing these interviews, from
Sure.
Phil hearing the tape to Michael McNeil going to a gig before he auditioned. What about that sound and the recording that you heard with Braxton and that working trio? What did you hear about that made you say, wow, why did that leave such an impression on you?
Well, I think at first the level of virtuosity was like staggering, as far as really not really hearing trumpet playing like that before. But on top of that, it's not just it's not like empty virtuosity. Sometimes you can hear somebody just wailing on something, or especially growing up with drummers, and it's just like, how fast can you play? Not necessarily what you're playing musically. It's just, can you? It's almost is like the Whiplash movie, which is like a terrible movie, but to me it's a copy, because I just think the whole concept of it just makes me laugh. But aside from that, so when I heard the trio, and it's like the first track on the album is just like 700 beats a minute. I mean, I'm just exaggerating, but it's just like, well, they're actually playing something. They're not just like, it's not like a buzz saw going through the studio. So that was that. It wasn't just the technical aspect. It was the musical aspect, and just the only word I can think of is fearless, as far as like, they're just doing this, and they don't care where the edge of the cliff is. They're poised to just jump right off it and land and stick the landing, right? So,
Oh, I love that. And so in hearing this, it strikes me as that you had an interesting relationship where you recorded a number of albums together, but then there was also a friendship that lasted a long time. And of course, it was probably built by the fact that you guys were born in the same area and had a lot of commonalities. And I haven't asked this question to any of these interviewees yet, so I wanted to ask it this way. What was Paul Smoker like as a friend?
Um, he was thoughtful. The first thing he did, one of the first things he did after uh, we got to know each other, and I think he did this with a lot of his students too. He would just send me stacks of cassettes of music that he had. I mean, just uh, not just jazz, but a lot of classical or contemporary composers. Maybe 30-40% of it I had, but just the fact that he had all this other stuff that I didn't have, and the fact that he would go to that much trouble to, put on a record back in those days, probably maybe a CD, but most likely a record, fire up a cassette recorder, make a cassette, label it, mail it, and just do that, and then even have handwritten letters where he was like talking about the music.
Hmm.
And then I got to know Bev, and Evan, when I first met him, was barely walking. I think he'll love that. But that was when they were still in Iowa. And he, met my wife here when we first got together. My son wasn't born yet, but he was born 91, year, I think, the first recording. So we would do things if they would come back into Quad Cities. We usually arrange to go back there, or often arrange to go back there, just sort of hang out. Bev and my wife Kathy and her boys, which they were pretty young at the time. Or if they come in through Chicago, we visited them out in Rochester a couple of times, and it was just it was like a family friendship. He was like family.
Yeah. Now, what about him as a mentor? You said you had no formal teacher-student relationship, but again, everyone I spoke to describes that their student-teacher relationship with Paul as a mentorship, that it was very one-on-one, that it was about playing duos, that it was teaching through connecting with students on a professional level. So you played gigs with Paul, you knew him as a family friend, and he was also a mentor to you. You talked about some of those things that you learned from him that he taught you. What were some of those things? What still sticks with you today, whether it's about music specifically, being a musician, professionalism, what lessons of Paul's still stick with you today?
Well, the from the position I came from, I was always interested. I've been always interested in drumming since I was little. I mean, I've been interested in jazz, and then my palette of what I would do or what I was interested in would continue to expand through the years. And I would hear certain people in my environment that was playing I enjoyed, but for a lot of things, for the music that I was interested in, there wasn't a lot of people that I could directly really absorb a lot from, which it sounds kind of self-serving, and it's not meant to be. It was frustrating actually when I would like in college, there was like the new music, and the basic curriculum was very good. As far as what I wanted to do in improvised music, I wanted somebody to like just stomp on me, just make it better, make me play better. I mean, that was certain things. Certain of my friends would used to say when I was in school. They were just like, "You need to play with better players." And I'm like, "Where are they? They weren't there. I mean, for what I wanted, they weren't there." So they would continue to get better after I got out of school. But as far as what I thought I was looking for musically or conceptually, it really crystallized more once I met Paul, because I could talk to him. I could sort of vet certain things he wasn't, he was complimentary, but not afraid to be critical of something. So, um, so that combined with uh, just being somebody I liked hanging out with anyhow, um, that was sort of the nature of. I was really hoping at some point that I could get someone who really got what I was doing and knew more about it than what I did. I mean, instead of always having to find something for myself, this was someone I could pull something back from.
Yeah.
So in that way, he was a teacher that I never had, teacher I had always wanted, but I never had.
Yeah. Paul passed away. Well, actually, I wanted to ask this first. We're coming up on the celebrating Smoker concert. At the time of us recording this, we're a handful of days out. It's coming. It's coming into shape. We kind of know what it's going to look like at this point. A lot of the set list has been picked out. I just wanted to pick your brain on your thoughts on the concert, what you're looking forward to, and what do you hope people who go take away from it?
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing the musicians, most of which I haven't seen for a long time. I mean, I'm like, as far as say Jim Yonda, for example, I saw him at Paul's memorial, and we've stayed in touch, but we haven't played together for a really long time. There's some other people there that I'm looking forward to that I haven't seen in a long time, but I've had the chance to play with, Vinny Golia and Ken Filiano, and in particular, there's others. Michael McNeil's coming in, who I stay in touch with, but we haven't played for a while. And so there's that. I think just acknowledging some of what Smoker has done and continues to inspire people to do. So there should be some good music. There should be some interesting accidental music. We hope that with all these people that are such great improvisers. I've met Herb Robertson, but I've never had a chance to play with him. He wouldn't even remember meeting him, I don't think, but that's either here or there. So yeah, and then seeing Bev and Evan and just sort of hanging out and enjoying Smoker stuff.
Yeah, man. Uh, it's a two-parter. How do you remember Paul, and what do you think his legacy is?
Well, I remember him as kind of a character. He had a fun sense of humor, kind of sarcastic sense of humor, which kind of jives with mine. So that's good. He cared about people. He cared about people he played with, his students, obviously his family, and I think, and I know this is what part of this celebration, part of what Phil's spearheading too, is that he really was musically, I think, from a trumpet standpoint, uh, a, a pretty major figure, especially in the period that he played in. And I think it was that combination that we talked about, that some of the concepts that he combined, whether it would be Harry James style trumpet to Gerhard Schwartz, whether it was classical, new age, not new age, but new God, not new age, very modern classical music,
Yeah.
and Clifford Brown, just combining all of those, but definitely just having his own sound.
Yeah.
And I think so. He made an important contribution. He made a lot of good records, and it's hard, just with the crush of media and really sort of transient media, that it's important that some of this stuff be kept alive, or that people are at least are kept aware of it
Yeah.
and enjoy it.
Anything I didn't ask you about that you'd like to add?
No, there's all I could close with I liked a funny story about
Please.
what's with Paul. Um, well, Davenport, where Paul's from, most famous trumpet player there is not Paul, but it's Vic Spiderbeck. And ever since the 70s, uh, they've had, like, every summer, they have a Vic Spiderbeck Jazz Festival, which usually, I mean, as most part is they just don't play anything that was created before 1930 when Bix died. They basically, that's what they do, and they don't do the best versions of it. Because I haven't been there for a long time. But one year, for whatever the reason, my family and Paul's family were back in the Quad Cities. Or we knew that Paul was going to be there, so we came down from Chicago, stayed at my parents. And so Paul and I are hanging out one evening, and we're walking along the riverfront in Davenport during the Big Spiderback Festival. And preface this a little bit, Paul had this sort of dry chuckle, little sarcastic chuckle. It was got, that's a bad imitation, but that's kind of, you have to kind of imagine. So we're walking around. It's during the Big Spiderback Festival, and it's down on the riverfront, and there's, people walking around, and these little, I think some bands might have been playing on the street, but mainly were playing at the band shell. And we're looking around, and I go, Smoker, one of these days they're going to have one of these for you.